Hey, 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 guys. Welcome to Building This Community.
This is your city business and policy development podcast. We're your hosts,
Luke Patrick
and Andrew Klump. Welcome to this week's episode of Building This Community. Our guest today is Tony Vanetti, who got his start as a rock and roll DJ in Louisville and now is the co-host of the Tony and Dwight show and the Afternoon Underdogs. Tony, how are you doing today?
We're doing fantastic, yes. 30 years ago, I got my start at WQMF, so I'm 51. So you do the math on how old I was when I walked in the door. I actually lied my way to get into the door and then lied my way for the next 2 weeks to stay there. So that's how my career started.
That's awesome, man.
So, okay, well, since you started your career lying, you want to just give us about how your career actually progressed?
Yeah, give us a little bit.
Yeah, I was kind of floundering and going to a community college and trying to figure out things. I graduated from Trinity and I was a little lost a little bit. I ran into a guy that was working in radio and he was like, hey, do you want to come down and write some jokes for me? And I said, sure. So I went down there, wrote some jokes for him that day, and I did 2 character voices, and they ran that day. And I looked at him, I said, you get paid for this? I mean, that's how raw I was. I was young. I was like 19. And he said, yeah. And I said, do you mind if I stick around? And he said, no. So every day I came back and I just told the receptionist I was here to see that guy, whether he was here or not. And I just went and sat in a corner for weeks and waited for somebody to say, hey, who can drive the van? And I said, I can. And that was how it all got started. So I drove the van, got people coffee, got people lunch until somebody got sick last second. And they said, we need somebody for overnights. And remember, this is back before automation, where it was 24 hours live, CDs, everything. And I worked an overnight shift, and that's how I got started. And 2 years later, I was afternoon drive at 23 years old on WQMF, and the rest is history.
That's awesome, man. And I'm sure, like, over the course of your career, you've seen a lot of changes in radio at the local, national level. For us here in Louisville, it seems like we're kind of in the middle of a trend. It's happening. You really see it all across the country, actually, where radio stations are moving to more like conglomerate, like national ownership. Have you witnessed any of that throughout your career? And if so, what are the pros and cons?
So in the 1990s, all the way up through the early 90s, you could own like a Class A, which is like a WHAS, and then you can own a smaller station like a Class C, like those 93.9s or 93.1, the smaller FMs or AMs, right? So you can own those, but you couldn't own 2 huge ones, right? They limited how many stations you could own. And then Bill Clinton era, they deregulated how many stations you could own, and that opened the floodgates. So, for example, WQMF, we bought a side station to compete with the Fox for rock music, and we bought a little Class 6,000 watt station, Class C station, for $600,000. And a year later, we sold it for $2.9 million. So the buying spree was on. So then all of these radio stations started getting gobbled up by huge companies. Look, it was not for the betterment of radio. I mean, I don't think anyone would say that one company owning all these radio stations was a good idea. They've tried to do this for forever, which is try to have one jock do 10 cities, and it's just not the same. So I don't know how in depth you want me to go with that, but it is, we've had a lot of things thrown at radio over the years. It started with 8-tracks, and they told us, hey, 8-tracks are going to put radio out of business. And then it was the Walkman. And then it was CDs, and then it was satellite radio was a real threat, and they haven't really done anything. Radio has really survived through that for all the years. But to answer your question about the big companies, obviously I work for iHeart, which is the biggest. There's advantages and disadvantages, but it's not a benefit to the listener.
So yeah, no, I think we can agree on that. But what you've talked about all of the different threats that have occurred throughout your career. What do you see as radio's role right now in like the modern media landscape? And maybe has that even changed a little bit with the current state of things? This pandemic.
Yeah, it's so weird because, FMs took over AMs, and it was sort of a joke that you were on the AM, right? And then the AM owned it. AM owned it, then FM owned it. Remember, the top music station in Louisville for decade was wacky, and they were on 790 WKRD, what 790 WKRD is now. That was AM, so they played music on AM. Then FM came in, and FM took over. And now FMs are kind of floundering because of music services and all that. So now AM talk radio. Why do we have a foothold? Why are we still financially successful, and why local radio still works is because we can't talk about the Metro Council. We can't talk about LMPD. We can't talk about Breonna Taylor in a local level without doing AM talk radio. We're doing just fine. Look, the listenerships are down, but consumption of audio is up. Like it's hard to describe what has happened over the last decade, but it's like music though. Consumption is up, revenue is down a tad bit, and we're trying to find our way, just like every other medium, newspaper, television, and radio. In my opinion, boys, I think radio is doing better than what television and newspapers are doing.
Well, and like with podcasts growing, right? And you all, I know, for example, your shows, at least you podcast through iHeartRadio. You just re-record, or you send the recording to iHeartRadio for people to listen whenever they want. Mm-hmm. I mean, has that changed your role and your accessibility to maybe different businesses that are looking to promote themselves?
You know what a podcast is? Do you know what a podcast is?
Yes.
It's a radio show. It's a radio show.
Yeah.
It's a radio show. This new invention called the podcast. Hey, dude, that's a radio show. What you guys are doing right now is a radio show. Okay, you're just doing it in a long form with no breaks. Now, if you get lucky and people start to listen and somebody says, hey, I want my shoe company to be on your radio show, you do a mention at the beginning, a mention in the middle, a mention in that. Guess what? You're a radio show now. So podcasts to me are great because it elevates the AM listener. I've said to the last couple of years, I said, look, because a lot of disc jockeys, a lot of air personalities are saying these podcasts, we're advertising so much for this podcast, is taking away from advertising our own radio shows. And I'm like, look, man, my son is 17. He's a senior at Trinity. He listens to more podcasts than that's all he listens to is podcasts, one after another. He's a God love him. He's a liberal and a Democrat. And he listens to a lot of liberal podcasts, but he's consuming audio content at 17, where when I was 17, I was listening to Guns N' Roses. So we're introducing this medium to younger audiences. I think it helps us in the long run.
Do you think that it takes away from your advertisements, or do you see less value in return in your podcast ads versus radio? Just because people have the ability to skip through with a podcast that they may not necessarily have with.
Yeah. No. Yeah. There's no question about that we have to find that sweet spot, don't we? Like you can listen to the podcast and let's say it's 45 minutes long. You might have a mention or two for a sponsor in there, but there's no commercial. It still cannot replace me talking about Louisville basketball, or you can't replace Greg Fisher's problems as mayor of this city. You can't replace that with and the interaction. We take phone calls. It's hard to do podcasts and you have sort of an interaction because you got to do it live, but then is it a podcast or a radio show at that point?
Yeah, no, fair enough. So kind of branching off of that a little bit, do you think that, what kind of advice would you give to people that are looking to break into this industry now, especially as it's gone more national than local?
I will tell you what I tell when I go to colleges, universities, and I speak to communications or radio or television students, high schools. I say the same thing. Look, this isn't a like business. This is a love business. You have to love it. It has to get in your veins. It has to get in your blood system. It has to get into your soul. You have to love this industry. Journalists, I mean, look at us. We're crazy. Journalists that stick with us. Look at Rick Bosich. He's been covering sports for 50 years. This is a love. You're not going to get rich. There's very few of us that have, I break these personalities out in different categories. There are ratings generators. Matt Jones is a ratings generator. He moves the needle. And then there are revenue generators. Myself and Terry Miners are a mix of the two, where we can generate ratings, but we also generate revenue. But they're rare there. And then you have journalists, remember John Ziegler that was here, that was just a wacko, crazy journalist type guy. He's not really doesn't do well in the business end of things, but he generates high ratings. If you're going to get in this business, I tell them, The second you go to college, university, wherever you go and apply to every radio station, every TV station that is in that area of your university. I don't care if it's Syracuse or Northwestern or Western Kentucky, wherever you go, apply right now. The second you get a job, put all your concentration into that job. Graduate, okay? But if you have a job, you're already working in an industry, they're going to teach you everything you need to know. And if you got it, you got it. If you don't, you don't. This is the kind of industry to where people that have it will move up quickly, and you'll figure it out quickly if you don't have it. That makes sense?
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you real quick, we've seen the pandemic, it's kind of decimated certain industries. It's caused all kinds of turmoil, but specifically for me, one thing that I really miss is live music, man. I love getting out there. I live right down the street from the Paris Town Hall. It's awesome. I've yet to see like a real concert in there, and I really wanted to before this whole thing started. What do you see as the future for music venues and festivals here in Louisville or other cities, wherever you've got a little insight?
Well, okay, so that's where I started is rock music and concerts. I mean, that's what we did. We promoted rock concerts and events. And that's what we do. iHeart really is an event company. It's a radio and a podcast company, but it is also an events company. So you used to be able to just have a stage and a couple of kegs and you were good to go. The same thing it has mirrored with sporting events. You used to go to the University of Tennessee and 110,000 people sat on aluminum bleachers, right? And you had about a six inch space to sit. Well, now people that want to go to concerts, if you look at the Louder and Live concerts, if you look at those things, the amenities that go along with those concerts now, the food is fine dining. It's like, it's nice. It's really good food. The beer.
It's not hot dogs anymore.
No, right? So where that's going is that you're going to have to provide the concert goer with nicer amenities. You want a nicer beer. You just don't want a domestic. You don't want a draft beer. You want an imported bottled beer. You want food that's not a nacho, right? That's where all concerts are going. And look, this COVID has decimated events companies, and it's decimated bands, and it's decimated families. There are going to be some people that don't come back to this industry because they have had to take a year off. We're all crossing fingers that this damn vaccine is going to do what it's supposed to do. And by the time it gets to May, we can be back in business.
Do you think that, so you think radio and podcasting, those have a lot better shelf life just because they're not in person? And you really, I mean, how can the music industry, the live music industry transition or kind of protect itself during this time?
Okay, look, first of all, it's the only way artists make money anymore. Okay, you're not making money selling CDs. I mean, the death of the music industry, it was just like what I mentioned at the top, where I said consumption is up, but revenue is down. Consumption of music is up. The revenue is down. Okay, when we had record companies that were selling albums, and then they were selling $16 cassettes and $16, and then when it got to the CDs, boys, let me tell you, it cost 20 cents to print a CD. And these companies were making a ton of money, and they were passing that along to the artists. These artists were making millions and millions of dollars, and the amenities were unbelievable. I've got a million stories. You would go, you did what? So when it all went to Apple and when it all went to online and the artist is getting 10 cents, it cut the throat of the artist. Mm-hmm. And now the only way to make money is to go on the road. So that's not going to go away. Live events are going to continue to happen because these artists are the only way to generate money is to go on the road.
No, that's fair. Do you think that the cities or states or even federal government's going to have to step in to help the venues? I mean, the venues are, I would assume, in most cases are typically owned by more conglomerates or sometimes local people, but that's different than the artist. Do you foresee a lot of music venues closing, and how can we prevent that?
Yes. And it's going to take years to recover. The margins for a lot of these places are just so small. We're throwing them in with restaurants and stuff. And we see where the pecking order, if you are doing it, if you're a live events person, you see where you are in the pecking order of the rest of the planet because everyone else is getting help, not you. I mean, it's a rude awakening for a lot of folks. And I think it will eventually come back, but it is going to take a long time. We might sit here, and if you have me back on your podcast a year from now to kind of reset where we are, I just don't know. I don't know how many venues are going to say, I can't do this anymore, and that's it. I don't know how many bands are going to say, no, I've got to go to a real job. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but the pecking order, certainly. Have you heard a lot of politicians going, let's make sure we're taking care of the live venue places? I haven't heard once.
Nope.
Yeah, no, that's maybe missed in the discussion.
So you're starting to get into what more of the nitty gritty of this podcast, which is more of a policy podcast. So what do you see your role in influencing local policy? Do you think you get the ability to actually influence it? You know, you've talked about Breonna Taylor, you talked about the mayor, or I always like to go back to the example of Topgolf, the fact that Louisville is like the only city in the world that seems to be fighting Topgolf coming. What's kind of your role in influencing local policy?
Look, I'm a center guy. I'm in the middle. I really am. I think I've been a Democrat my whole life, but I figured out that I am a 1990 George H. Bush Republican. That's what I am. A lot of his policies, if you look at George H. Bush and what he did, he would be called a left-wing nutbag in today's standards.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, gun control. He expanded welfare. I mean, it is really retreated to these corners, and it's sad to say. But yes, part of our job, I think last year when Greg Fisher was trying to push that we were 19 million in the hole or whatever it was, 30 million a hole, and he was trying to push that tax on the insurance premiums. Remember that? Mm-hmm. We went show to show kind of together. There wasn't a meeting to where we said, hey, let's all go against this tax. Each show sort of said, not on my watch. We were printing off. It was so exciting. It was fun to print off the budget and say, okay, where are we going to cut from? We don't need a new tax. So why did we know about this shortfall in the budget right before the election, and all of a sudden they dumped it on us? So at WHAS, all of our shows collectively, we didn't have a meeting and said, hey, let's all go against this tax. We all collectively as shows printed off the budget and said, we don't want this. Remember, that didn't pass. They were going to tax insurance policies and all that. And people were like, what is going on? So that was something that we could look at to say, hey, we did some good there, right? So is there value in AM radio and talk radio locally? Absolutely. I mean, that was a win. That was a win for us. Hey, how do we make sure that there is transparency? Well, that's what we try to do every single day for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can give a quick aside, the funny thing is, I know, at least from my role in Auburn Park City Council, is that, you may not know this, Tony, but that legitimately incorporated cities take up a third or a quarter of the city of Louisville, and they all have their own insurance business tax.
Right.
And not until the very end, I asked multiple Metro Council members, nobody asked if the incorporated cities were going to match whatever Metro Louisville did. No, that conversation didn't happen.
Right.
And so the funny thing is about the legislature, the laws here is that, say every incorporated city stayed at 5% and Louisville went at 10%, that difference would go to Louisville.
Right.
And no one ever even talked about that from Metro's perspective. And it's like it's very rare that if you don't have someone covering local media like what you're doing, I just don't see how anything like that ever gets picked up.
It's why we're going to survive. Okay. And it's instant. Radio is instant. We're live 24 hours a day. I love the newspaper. I love the CJ. I've been reading it since I was a kid. I was that weirdo that watched the news and read the paper as a kid. So I love those mediums, but the paper just can't keep up anymore. I know it's online and all that, and they do a great job. I love all the writers, but radio is right there in your face. And those are the things that you can tackle when you have these pension issues that are insane. And it's like, why isn't anyone talking about the pensions are getting ripped off? I mean, we need to talk about it.
No, you're absolutely right. So that brings me to my next point is, do you ever just get frustrated with, local failures at some point. Louisville seems to be shooting itself in the foot more than a lot of different cities. And to be fair, you have a platform to vent more than most people. So I'm just curious if you ever go through that frustration.
It's when I was a kid, we used to make fun of Indiana. Like we used to like a Hoosiers and we made jokes and stuff.
Oh, we still can, but.
And now, and by the way, they're so much better than us. It's not even close. I mean, their Indiana is so much better off. I did, for example, real quick, we did a 2-hour show on highways and expressways and where we are with roads, right? Mm-hmm. And when they first pitched it to me, I was like, we're doing what? And it ended up being a fascinating 2 hours, right? So we went 45 minutes with the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety person that knew all the stuff, right? And he talks for 45 minutes and he says, well, we don't know if we can pay for any of this because we don't have the money. And then I noticed that the Indiana highway person is sitting next to me. I can't remember his name. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Let's give the floor to you. He pulls the mic up. He says, we're fully funded for the next 20 years for every single road project that we want to do, and pushed his mic away. Look, taxes are lower. They have gambling. They have marijuana. They're going in a direction. They are more open. We have a problem because we're a commonwealth and we have to do things differently than they do. But Indiana's better. Louisville is also trapped because we have to feed the rest of the state. How much? And Andrew, you probably know for every tax dollar I pay in city, how much of that goes to the state? Is it 40 cents?
Oh God, I don't know. I don't know that off the top of my head.
I think it's 42 cents a dollar.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
That goes out of our community. It doesn't stay here in Louisville. So as much crap as Eastern Kentucky and Western Kentucky and Northern Kentucky give us, we're giving you 42 cents of every dollar. If you hate us, don't take the 42 cents.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, there's all kinds of issues within the state and honestly across the nation right now. Stepping back a little bit, do you think you as a radio host or radio in general could factor into kind of bridging the gap in this country, trying to bring us together? Where you mentioned you're a George H.W. Bush conservative, and I think you're absolutely right that there was a middle ground back in the day. And now we've seen this race to the edges where people just can't find a common ground that they can communicate on anymore. Like, do you think you guys play any role in bringing people together?
The part of the problem is that they legalize crime in politics. All right. Nixon happened. All right. If you do your homework, you'll look up Nixon happened and all those lawmakers looked at each other and said, well, we can't have that again. We can't go to prison. What are we going to do? Let's legalize the stealing. That's what happened. And that's the world you live in now. So all the lawmakers in D.C. are just stealing on the behalf. And that's why they want to stay for 36 years, right? Who would want to do that job for 40 years? I mean, seriously, you're doing that because you're stealing. You're getting money, the stock options and all the rest of it. And you don't have a long enough show to go into it. It's so divisive. It's so nasty. My kids it pisses me off so bad. My kids were, when the last 2016, were 11 and 15. They watched the whole process and were so disappointed in the whole thing. Like, this is what we have to choose from? And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Donald Trump is talking about the size of his penis at a Republican debate. And where are we as a country now that that's acceptable? I don't understand that. And then Hillary, like, we really need a choice with Hillary. That was the worst possible choice that we could have had on that left side. It's disappointing. I try to bridge, but that radio doesn't work. It's an interesting concept because liberal radio doesn't work. Conservative right-wing radio dominates. How many liberal radio shows you've ever listened to? Zero.
And like, you can name like the names on the right wing side, like their household, like they're enormous personalities.
What does that say?
I don't know.
Well, okay, that's what we need to discuss. Look, and here's the other thing: the more conservative right wing will show up at a rally. Yeah, left wings are like, I got mimosas and a brunch to go to. I don't know if I'm going to head to a rally today. But it's interesting because I've always asked that question. And by the way, Rush Limbaugh that's a show. It is an amazing, anybody that's successful for that long is an amazing guy. And obviously he just takes a punch at liberals every single day. But why is conservative radio dominant and there are zero liberal radio shows? It's interesting to try to dive into that and figure out. By the way, there is no real answer. There was a trick question. It's hard. No one knows why.
Fair enough. So speaking of bridging the gap a little bit, then what do you see as the Louisville versus Kentucky, like the sports rivalry, the urban versus rural drama? Is that too much for states like us to overcome? I know the Louisville Kentucky rivalry often gets compared to maybe like in Alabama, Auburn, and that maybe not necessarily what you want to be compared to from like a state economic development standpoint, but you're seeing that from a college sports rivalry. Do you think those go hand in hand at all?
Absolutely. Yes, it does. And it's the dynamic of the entire state. Louisville is an island in this state. And the University of Louisville is. U of L for a while started to creep a little bit out into the state, but then it creeped right back like an ocean wave, kind of came back to the city. The state is dominated by UK fans. It's just non-negotiable. Louisville fans are in the state or the city of Louisville, and you're exactly right. It is the dynamic. It does make sense. Red versus blue. Here we go, right? Lexington and Louisville vote one way, the rest of the state vote another, right? I mean, it's so interesting to start to dive in. I think that Louisville fans are more liberal and UK fans are more Republican. That's just my opinion of doing a sports show for 12 years. So
you're probably right. So
I think I'd agree with you on that one.
Right. So, and you go to U of L game back in the day, it was wine and cheese and a little bit more sophistication. And UK is, look, UK fans are delusional. They believe they should win the championship every year. And Louisville fans are insecure. We are insecure. We have that little brother thing that we're trying to keep up with. And let's just be honest, the greatest basketball program of all time. And what is our luck? You got to compete against Kentucky, which no one can. So we're insecure. They're delusional. That's my breakdown.
Do you think that holds back the growth of the state, though, more than just like the sports rivalry itself?
Man, I think it's no, because when you get into politics, it's just sort of a Bible Belt out there, and you can't compete with that. They're not going to vote for anything that you want to do, anything that's fun. That's at least. But no, when I was growing up, you got in high school football, you got a Jefferson County winner, and then the rest of the state played off, and then the state championship was the state winner versus the Louisville Jefferson County winner. And we loved it that way.
That is super interesting. I'd never heard that.
Oh yeah. And when it changed, the rest of the state was kind of pissed because they were like, oh great, Male and Trinity will play for the state title. St. X and Trinity will play for the state title. And more than most, a lot of times or a PRP sneaks in there. That's what happens is two Louisville teams play for the title and the rest of the state is left out. But I love that dynamic. So what happened, and I don't want to chase a squirrel, but we used to play every single playoff game was played at Cardinal Stadium. So they had doubleheaders on Friday night and doubleheaders on Saturday night. All the public schools got a chance to play on the turf, and it was cool.
No, that's great, man. Tony, this has been an awesome conversation. I hate to wrap it up, but we got like just a couple more questions before we need to sign off here.
Sure.
First off, I want to let you, if you have any projects or anything you're working on that you'd like to promote, you can tell our audience about that.
Just tune in 9 to 12 on WHAS and I have fun on the sports show. Louisville's taken its hits over the last couple of years and we're trying to rebuild that back, but it is just going to be, look, the Louisville athletic department got COVID about 6 years ago and they were ahead of the game. And they're trying to rebuild that brand as much as they can. College basketball is in real trouble. College football is always going to be king. But college basketball needs a big rebuild, and that's the problem with the NBA and, basically the NBA. The NBA has destroyed college basketball, and we're going to try to get that back, but I don't know how that's going to happen. But please listen to those two shows, and that's about it. And Blessings in a Backpack, that's one of my things, is feed the kids. There are food insecurity for kids in this town is to the tune of 100,000 kids starve every day
Jeez.
in this city, and that has to stop. So that's one of my passions, definitely.
Yeah, that's unreal. Definitely. But and then last question before we sign off here, we like to ask all of our guests the same thing. If you could change one policy in the city of Louisville, what would it be?
Oh my God, I've got a laundry list, but I'll start with medical marijuana. We've got to be able to get. Gosh, I don't know where to go here.
Too many options.
Yeah, is gambling in the on the queue somewhere?
It's like a chocolate chip cookie or a Reese's cup. What do I want to choose? And I will tell you this, and I don't know if you know this, but the mindset in Louisville has changed. Okay, and we got to continue to do that. All right. You've got to understand that the soccer stadium being built was gigantic, and that the soccer academy that's being built is moving forward. There are two things that happened in Louisville history I don't know if you know about, but number one, the Grand Ole Opry should have been in Louisville. The country music scene should have been in Louisville. They came to Louisville first and asked the Binghams that they wanted to lease their station and put country music on it. And the Bingham in charge said, I don't really like country music. So they drove to the next 50,000 watt clear station, which is where? Right down 65 to Nashville. That was one mistake. Number two, when the airport authority came out and said, we want to build a huge airport in Shelbyville. It will connect Frankfurt and Lexington and Louisville, and it will create this gigantic corridor of business. It'll be the biggest airport in the Midwest. They wanted to bring it to Louisville. Well, guess what happened? People in Shelbyville and the big money people said, nope, not happening. Take it somewhere else. You know where they went? Atlanta. So that's why you fly through Atlanta everywhere you go in this damn country. So we've made mistakes. We got to think forward. You got to invest. The soccer stadium was huge in so many more. The Yum Center and the soccer stadium were huge in more ways than you know, and it changes the community to a point that just elevates the entire community to another level. And we got to keep thinking that forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. That's a really good point.
Absolutely. Well, Tony, we appreciate you coming on as always, man. It was great.
We'll pick back up with our reaction segment after a word from our sponsor.
Well, Luke, Tony Vanetti gave us maybe the most energetic interview that we've had so far. I always enjoy talking to Tony because he's very passionate about what he does, and I guess he's that flavor of radio talk show host that maybe we don't necessarily get in a lot of our guests.
No. He definitely had his own unique personality. I love it. He's too funny. And you could tell whenever he went for like a radio, the name to designate the different stations, he fell right back into his radio voice and he blurted it out real quick. I loved that. I thought that was so funny.
So what did you think were kind of some of the main takeaways from that interview?
Well, it's interesting whenever you get to talk to somebody that's been in the industry for so long. He's got a great perspective on how things have changed, and he's right. It feels weird to call this a radio show, but when he said it, it is essentially we're doing the same thing. It's just an on-demand version. We're giving people the chance to listen to our content whenever they like, and we're trying to provide, clear commentary on things that are happening in our community and the policies that have, built our town. And
we didn't have to apply for a job to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Just our hobby,
No, for sure. The actual threshold for entry, the bar for entry is much lower when you want to do it yourself in this manner. It's really easy to get into, and I've had a great time doing it. It's fun. You can do it in your spare time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think going into that threshold, the interesting thing about this is that is why revenue is down, what he kept talking about. It's the same thing that happened with print journalism is once Facebook and social media took over, that they could start putting ads up for cheap, that even if companies weren't getting the impressions per individual, they could get so many different areas covered that they could then get a better bang for their buck. There was so much more competition for those individual ads. The same thing seems to be happening in the audio world as well is that now everyone can have a podcast and you can find a sponsor, or you just have a YouTube channel that if you get enough viewers, YouTube automatically starts putting up advertisements on your videos as well.
Yeah.
So I think the same thing's happening in audio.
No, absolutely. Like it's decentralized to a certain degree. Like the previous gatekeepers that you would need to surpass in order to get a show on radio, like the heads of stations, things like that you no longer need to go through those formal channels. It's democratized it, and it's been a great thing for people that want to bring credible commentary into the realm. But it also, I think, it kind of has a dark side. A little bit, because anybody can voice their opinion now and in some cases be heard by millions. And as much as we take our duty to present facts and credible reporting, to our viewers, I think some people they don't engage in like a rigorous fact checking process that yields relevant information.
Well, that's exactly why we have a white paper or some sort of academic article typically on every single episode, because we want, one, to make sure that we're talking factually, but two, we want to make sure that there is an avenue for people to get more information every time that we do one of these. But not everyone's going to do that. So that is kind of the trade-off with this, in that, yeah, you can do more public discussions. It's easier to reach more people now maybe than it has ever been. But there's the chance that people take that privilege and misuse it, or not even necessarily purposely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it goes beyond the white paper. It's also, I would say, the guests play a role in bringing in necessary commentary, and they're all in their given fields. I would call all of them experts. And so they're able to speak with a kind of foundational knowledge that you and I might not be able to bring to a subject when we're just engaging with it in the lead up to an episode. They can present their own perspective. And sometimes it is surprisingly distinct from what I would have imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that said, I do want to go into and make one caveat for one thing that Tony said, is that he did mention that I think 42 cents for every dollar that Louisville pays in taxes goes out to the state and doesn't come back. We both did a quick review. We couldn't find that exact number. I've heard that my entire life, so I think there is some validity to it. I don't know. We don't know that precise number. So that kind of just plays into what we're talking about with making sure that everything that we present is accurate. But with that said, it's also kind of the same scenario we're seeing with, and this is changing gears a little bit, the same scenario we're seeing with, like what New York does with the United States is like New York City, and the state of New York probably pays more than its fair share of taxes than what it receives back.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's an interesting dynamic that you're seeing on a state to federal level that we're seeing a lot on the city to state level. I think at a certain point it's important because you can't forget about people that are out in the state, but it also can hold back the city a little bit too in some regard. So it's definitely an important topic for talk radio to delve into, I think.
Yeah, as much as we'd like to keep all of our revenue in-house in Louisville, that's not an appropriate way of running a state. It's not an equitable way of running a state, but you're exactly right. I do want to turn now to actually talking about the white paper for this week, which is cheap speech and what it has done to American democracy. And it feeds into everything we've been talking about so far, which is basically that it's much easier now for people that want to engage in some form of media to do so. And as much as that has allowed for people like Andrew and myself to start things like this podcast, there are people that are either not informed or are intentionally misinforming their viewers to try and create a disruptive media atmosphere that has had and can have big drawbacks in our democracy and our system of government.
Another major drawback, to kind of build off what you're saying, to me, is accessibility to that more prestigious, more peer-reviewed information. So print journalism, I still think, is probably the best source of information that you can get.
Yeah, I think most people would pretty much consider that the gold standard.
But you're seeing most of those now, because of the change in the landscape, because of blogs, because of radio, because of podcasts, are simply going into this realm of where they have to start charging. And even if it's a nominal fee, if you want to have access to multiple places, your local newspaper, more national outlets, you can't. That just seems to be more disproportionately serving the wealthy and just ignoring the poor. So then that leaves more poor people with having less access to correct news.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, we see that in the actual journalism industry. It's the revenues have fallen, and as a result, they've had to cut jobs. In fact, the paper noted that between 2001 and 2016, so just over a 15-year period, the number of paid journalists in the U.S. was more than cut in half. If I remember correctly, it was somewhere around 412,000 journalists in 2001, paid journalists, and now it's about 170. So it's a substantial drop.
Yeah. And you do see them do more. Local newspapers, though, do more equitable things. So, like, for example, with COVID and with the Breonna Taylor situation in Louisville, you did see the Courier-Journal do more free articles so that people could stay more informed on particular things that were highly sensitive, and then obviously progress back to more of their paid platform. But it is something to which you see newspapers doing more of an equitable performance on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I appreciate whenever a paper will engage in the community like that. I think that's beneficial for everybody involved. But again, and this plays into what we've talked about in the Michael Lindenberger interview, there's been this overall trend of consolidation in the media landscape in America, print journalism in particular. And like even the Courier, is part of the USA Today larger network. Yeah. And so it's they maybe are in a position to do things like that, but a smaller independent news outlet might struggle to try making that decision between publishing for free or putting some kind of paywall up. Like, it's a difficult decision to make and not an enviable position to be in.
No, absolutely. And then you're also seeing, talk radio and other places consider doing more advertisements. Tony alluded to that too, that they can't promote their own show as much because, oftentimes the ads have to take precedent now because they're not as valuable as what they used to be.
No,
and that continues to be a problem for all audio and print journalism at this point. But I don't want to underscore with all those issues, it shouldn't undermine the importance of audio and the way the trend that we're seeing in America of people just consuming more and more audio and podcasts constantly. It seems to be the way of the future. It seems to be the way where people are going to start consuming most of their media or a large percentage of it.
Exactly. And anything you can do with your show or with your platform to make it more easily accessible to your potential audience, I think it's going to drive up your viewer numbers and it's going to help you in the long run. And I think, Tony, this is changing gears a little bit, but when he was talking about him tearing through the budget with his co-hosts and other media personalities in the city, that's an example of an incredible benefit that radio hosts in our city are providing to their listeners and to the community at large, because not everybody has the time or understanding to be able to tear through those documents and provide a decent and informed commentary. And that I think is really one of the core values that we can derive from local journalism.
No, absolutely. And I think that should be more of the standard. We'll see, I do wonder if there's any bias when people do that, both radio and non. Yeah. But it is an important topic to review city budgets. I mean, that's something that people just don't know enough about. And those types of things have to continue to stay on the forefront of the discussion. But other than that, I don't have anything else to talk about. Luke, do you?
No, I think that wraps it up for me.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. We appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. As always, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us on building this community. If you'd like any more information, you can follow us on Twitter
at buildingthiscom, COM, or you can follow Andrew
at Andrew J. Klump. And you can also follow Luke
at LMP43. Definitely subscribe, and we look forward to talking to you guys next week.